Welcome to The Mandate, a show featuring intimate conversations about men's mental health, masculinity, and identity. We bring you stories to inspire you, experts to guide you, and the tools you need to become the man you truly want to be. It's time to sit back, relax, and open up. Live from the Mandate Studio in Austin, Texas, here's your host, Adam Hoffman.
What's up, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode. We're getting started a little bit earlier than usual because, we've got stuff going on. So tonight, I am excited to have a new friend on, Brian Wang. We're going to be digging into all sorts of fun topics and learning more about him. And so tonight, we are going to talk about Brian's journey with mental health. We're going to get into really, what do we do with the emotions that we feel and the feelings that we have in our body? How can we use that to create better lives for ourselves? We'll talk about striking the right balance between experiencing our emotions and not letting them overwhelm us. We'll get into the meaning of manhood and how it's changing. And if we have time, we'll talk about belonging. But with that, I'd like to introduce you to Brian. He's an executive coach who is passionate about helping startup CEOs transform into amazing leaders. He's been an entrepreneur. He's worked in VC a little bit. But Brian, I'm excited to have you share your story a little bit more with us. Welcome.
I'm excited to be here, Adam. It's good to be with you.
Cool. Well, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm doing well today. It's Wednesday, it's hard to keep track of time these days. I think I was reflecting on this with my wife the other day. Time seems like it's been blurring a lot recently. I think largely because of the pandemic, but probably for a number of other reasons as well. But, I use those as signals that I should just check in with myself and get present. And presently, I'm feeling excited and happy to be in the presence today.
Very cool. Yeah, I've been hearing more and more from people that the days are, what day is it? It's day.
Yeah.
And then every now and again, you'll get the woo, it's Friday. And then you'll get the Sunday scaries or mopey Mondays. I don't know, whatever alliteration you'd like to put in front of the day of the week when you realize what day it actually is. And then I think just with everything else blurring so much together too, work, family, being sick, being at home, there's less kind of coming and going that signifies the beginning and the end of things.
That's right.
It really makes me wonder, will we settle into this, or what does the blend and the balance look like as things start to open up, people get more vaccinated? I mean, it'll be interesting.
Yeah. My wife was actually joking the other day because I think I was saying something like, I can't wait for it to be Friday. And my wife was basically just like, what's the difference? All the days are the same. There's no reason to get excited about Friday. It's sort of this arbitrary distinction. And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. At least that's the way it feels. So it's I think to your point, it's definitely drawing attention to all the structures that we normally take for granted for marking time and separating time, and fitting all of our attention into these neat little containers that we call days of the week.
That's right, our neat little containers, and we have many of them. We'll talk about probably a couple of them today. So let's start off. Tell us about who is Brian? What are you up to? And then I'd love to get into your journey with mental health.
Yeah. Where to start? So who am I? I find that to be an increasingly difficult and also easy question to answer, if that makes sense. I am, I think. Who am I? I'm gonna go do the traditional background thing and where I'm at
Sure.
now, just for the sake of meeting folks where they are. So I'm a former founder. Spent time in startups for over a decade as a CEO. Spent a stint in VC and product management, so I've worn a few different hats in the startup ecosystem. And these days, I'm an executive coach. And what that really means is that I spend all day working with CEOs and execs of early stage startups and really just helping them transform the way they're showing up as leaders. And I'm happy to go into more detail about what that means in specifics. But that's kind of how I'm spending my time right now, and where I'm putting most of my energy when I'm not being a husband and being a father. And yeah, that's very much tied with my own journey with mental health as well, which is an ongoing process. But with mental health, I think there's probably quite a few places to go there. But
Well, tell us more about, when did you first have your sort of like, oh, I have these thoughts and feelings and I'm not quite sure what to do with them. Maybe I should talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, that's such a great question. The first time I came to a realization that perhaps I need to seek some help and some support was around 2014. So that was towards the tail end of running this startup called Photocracy. And I was finding myself in a situation where the amount of stress I was enduring just felt totally crushing. I was dealing with a co-founder departure. I was dealing with a company that was running low on runway, and not feeling like I had a lot of different avenues or ways to get myself out of that situation. And so I remember I hired an executive coach back then. I didn't know what that was at the time. All I knew was that I really needed some support to help me get through that period. And that was with a wonderful coach and human being named Anna Maria Nino Marcia. And she really helped me learn just the skill and the art of developing my own self-awareness. And I think developing my own self-awareness was foundational to taking care of myself, right? So I think when we think about this idea of mental health, that's such a central concept. How can we care for ourselves if we don't know ourselves? How can we care for ourselves if we don't understand what's happening for us, what we're needing at any given moment, what gives us energy, what drains us of energy, and so on and so forth. And so that was 2014, where it was in this professional context, but really I think it was a human to human support structure that was really impactful for me. And then a few years later, I also started to work with therapists and started adopting meditation and so on. So we can kind of get into that. But that was my first I think exposure and first moment where I was like, I need help. That was quite memorable for me.
Yeah, it seems like coaching for sure has been something that has felt like it's been reserved for executives, senior leaderships. It's not something that, like, my dad has a coach, or my friend who works some middle-level manager job has a coach or something. Like it seems like it's something that's starting to go mainstream, but that's almost like people's first kind of dip their toe in, if you will, to making sense of what's going on up in here, which then eventually translates to like what's going on in all of this. So at what point were you like, you know what, I would like a little bit more than just coaching. I really want to dig into what's happening up here. Let's explore therapy.
Well, that's a great question. And that came up for me during a particularly challenging time for me in my personal life. And so not many people know this. My close friends and family do. But in 2017, my wife and I were going through a really tough period. And the relationship was really starting to break down. And if you zoomed out, you could notice that the both of us were really like locked into these reactive patterns that started to exacerbate the other. It came to a point where it really seemed like the marriage was going to come to an end. And so that was the point where I said, okay, if I'm going to survive this, I'm really going to need some help. And I decided to get some help from a therapist, and really just do the work on understanding what was going on for me, do the work on just helping relieve my anxiety and develop some coping strategies. And, there's a happy ending to this. The marriage eventually recovered. We were able to reconcile. We were able to move forward, even though for a long time it really felt like it was going completely in the opposite direction. And interestingly enough, I think the thing that enabled us to reconcile and to repair things was my accepting of the fact that it was ending. My acceptance and my coming to that moment. I think it produced a shift in my own mindset, in my own ability to relate, and that made a huge difference. And the thing is that it couldn't have been manufactured, right? It had to come from this authentic place, and I had genuinely arrived at a point where I said, okay, if this is what's going to happen, like, I'm going to accept that. I'm going to be able to move forward with it, right? So. Therapy certainly helped me in arriving at that place. Mindfulness meditation supported that as well, and it helped me connect more with myself. I think that was a huge part of it, especially in relationships, especially in primary relationships and romantic relationships. I think it's easy to inadvertently lose yourself in it, and you become disconnected in it. And you're no longer giving your full self to your partner because you're serving some other agenda that you're probably not even aware of. So I think that went off in a little bit of a different direction, but yeah, that was quite a journey for me. Absolutely.
Well, I just want to first acknowledge the vulnerability that it takes to share something like that. So thank you first. I'm grateful for your openness on that, and so much good wisdom there. I mean, even just, you went off on a tangent, but I think that's part of it, is just following where it feels right to go. And you mentioned awareness of yourself, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably meditation and mindfulness helped with that. But was there anything else that you could point to that really helped you see, I need to look inside in order to really take care of the stuff that's outside of me that you care about?
Yeah, it's a good question. If there was anything else, there were a number of books I remember reading at the time that were quite helpful in supporting that experience. And I remember going and reading the book Conscious Uncoupling, and that was really meant to be a support for me to kind of go through that process. And even though we didn't end up actually going through with the split, I think it helped me acquire certain concepts around the ways in which our childhood experiences might impact us, and how that might show up in the relationship, how that might have led you to that relationship in the first place, in this very unconscious way. And I think when you're able to shine a light on those ideas, that's when you're able to take ownership over those. That's when you're able to take responsibility for those. There's no longer the kind of hidden forces that are going to dictate your behavior. So I think certainly books and reading were helpful, and also just getting support from friends and family. It takes a village, and no man is an island, right? And so being able to be myself and show that vulnerability and get that support from others, I think it reconnected me to other humans in a way that I think I had been neglecting for a while. And so I think that was really instrumental as well.
Yeah, there's so much power in that, the idea of connecting with ourselves enable us to connect with the people that we care about in a deeper way, in a more authentic way that fits with us. And it resonates with me. It makes me think about energy expenditure and just how much energy, how expensive it is to be your inauthentic self. At the end of the day, like, that's what I've found, is like, when I'm not being me, I'm drained. And it's like, when I'm on these conversations with people like you, I feel like I could go forever, because I just get to be me, and I can be curious and vulnerable and authentic. And like, that's what ends up lighting me up.
That's right.
And you were going down, I think you were going down a path just briefly about your feelings along the way and maybe how that was showing up in your body, which I know is something that we wanted to talk about a little bit. So can you share more about, maybe not even in the context of then, but now, how do you check in with yourself and how you're feeling, like even physical sensations? What does that do for you? What does that look like?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Adam. And I think I'm noticing myself actually hesitating just to bring awareness to it in real time, because this is I'm acknowledging that this is an area that's still very much an area of growth and learning for me. So I'm noticing my own hesitation and anxiety around not saying something stupid. So I'm going to name that.
There you go.
And so, there's that voice that is just like trying to protect me and be like, don't say something stupid.
Do you have a name for that voice, by the way?
That's a great question. I don't actually, which is funny because that I often ask people to name that version of that voice for themselves when I'm working with individuals. There's a few voices in there, but this particular one, the one that's like, don't say something stupid, nameless to date. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But anyways, back to the question of like how I, get in touch with my own body and my own emotions. It's something that's still an ongoing area of growth for me. But what I find is the first place I start is just what is it that's my most pronounced felt sensation, and the thing that for me I notice is often very present is this sort of, I think there's two sensations. One is this tightness in the gut, or this heaviness in the gut, and also a constriction in my lower chest and just kind of my breathing cavity. And that's often associated with anxiety. It's often associated with feelings of doubt and uncertainty, which tend to be quite present for me. And the thing I've learned about being present to those feelings is that ignoring them almost never improves whatever situation I'm finding myself in. And the way I'm relating to them these days is simply just to pay attention and notice when they're there, and to show a bit of care for that. So I think that my current way of relating to emotions in general is to really honor the fact that there's signals my body is sending me, and that my brain and nervous system are sending me, and that they're inviting me to pay attention and to attend to some need that perhaps I'm not putting a lot of energy into at the moment. And, I'm careful not to fix it. I'm careful not to try to make it go away so much as just be present to it. And in my experience, by doing that, by showing a little bit of presence and some care, they tend to just relax by themselves. They don't need to be fixed, or they don't need to be shunned. I think even just being recognized helps the feeling itself sort of chill a little bit, sort of relax, if that makes any sense. And I realize I'm speaking about it as if it's a separate entity, but that's the way I conceptualize it these days. It's that these different feelings are parts that I'm recognizing, and I have found that it's helpful to treat them as kind of like a cast of characters internally, if that makes any sense.
It sounds like you also approach it with a lot of curiosity first, as opposed to judgment, like it's good or bad, or you said you try to not fix it. Just like, hey, it's here. Where did this come from? What is this thing? And that's almost the way that you can let it pass or subside, or serve you in the way that it needs to serve you, but not control you, which I think is sometimes what can happen with our emotions. Is it's just like, it's almost like you get hooked on them, and then that just feeds it. It feeds the beast, man. It just gets more angry, or more nervous, or more excited. Which don't get me wrong. There's this good certain level of excitement, but then there's like too much excitement.
Yeah.
So have you found anything that helps you make it so that you're only overcome with emotion when you want to be, as opposed to when the emotions want you to be? If that makes sense.
That's such a great question. I think I'm hearing you describe this idea of um, helping how do we allow our emotions to be our allies and our partners, and not to be this kind of um, overwhelming phenomena that just like we have no choice in we're just kind of victims to them. And look, I'm a human being like anybody else. I definitely have moments where I'm completely overwhelmed, and just if I'm being honest, just feeling real sorry for myself. And that's what I notice for myself when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and triggered and flooded and just completely unable, like I'm unregulated. What I know to be true from experience is I'm kind of just looking for someone to take care of me, and so the overwhelmed feelings are sort of a way that manifests, and it's not always easy to get out of that state. But what I have found is just allowing the people around me to know that sometimes that happens for me has been really helpful, because if I can't catch myself, maybe someone else can. And the other thing is, just the more I'm able to get familiar with that state, even if it's like that triggered, flooded state, the more I can have at least some presence of mind to exercise some choice. So if I'm noticing I'm kind of going into the pattern, one thing that I have found to be helpful to kind of be a little bit of an interruption for that pattern, if it's kind of going a little bit too much, is really just to ask, how can I be doing this better? And more practically, this is something that my wife and I sometimes do. So if my wife and I are getting into an argument or some sort of intense conflict, there's this question that we've come up with that admittedly we don't use as much as we probably could. But the question is essentially just, how could we be doing this better? Right. And it's a little bit of are you familiar with the kind of combo breaker meme?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, it's like, I'll get into it, but
I mean, I'm familiar with combo breakers in general if we're talking about like video games.
Yeah. So it's like, it's like, it's coming from video games, but there's this kind of internet meme, I think, where, you'll see a pattern of all of the same thing, or something that's all very the same likeness, and then all of a sudden the next item in the series is completely different, and then they'll go like combo breaker, right? And it's kind of what happens for us emotionally. Like if my wife and I are kind of going back and forth, and we're triggering each other, and we're getting all like into our own heads and our own patterns, I think that question, how can we be doing this better, is sort of a centering intervention. Because the reason I like that question, as simple as it is, so much is because one, you got the word we, right? So it's a reminder that we're a team, we're a unit. This isn't you versus me, we're on the same side. And then that how can we is, it kind of points to possibility, right? Because I think that I don't know about you, but when I feel really triggered, I kind of get into this zone where I'm just tunnel visioned. And it feels like whatever I'm feeling right now is the only thing I'm ever going to feel ever again. And I'm fundamentally closed off from possibility of some other experience. So when we say, how can we do this better? And then like do this better, I think helps reinforce that idea that like this requires some active, some action and stepping into some new choice. I think it helps us just like kind of snap out of it a little bit, right? Because it's easy to say we should attend to our feelings and really get in touch with all those and whatnot. But sometimes when you're like, in the really red zone, sometimes you just need something to like get back into a more regulated state and just like snap out of it. And then you can kind of tend to some of the more, soft wounded feelings a little bit later. I've found, it's a little bit of a fire alarm that you're pulling, or, break in case of emergency sort of thing.
I'm going to forever just say and hear combo breaker.
Yes.
In my brain from now on, is that like little, when I need to insert like, oh, this thing's running, it's about to be a runaway train, combo breaker. I also, in a more serious note, I love the creating possibility with the right words, especially we, if you're talking about somebody else. And that sounds like something that works not just in with your wife or your significant other, but like any other human. It's not about like yes to I statements if we're conveying how we feel, but if you're triggering each other and you can insert that, how might we or how can we? I really love that. That's a great takeaway.
Yeah.
For me, it also reminded me of when I was in therapy in a past relationship that I ultimately ended.
Yeah.
When we were in therapy, I learned about this concept called DPA, and I don't even, I can't remember what it stands for, but it was the term that the therapist used to talk about when we really reach our triggered point. Like we're past actually engaging in a conversation to resolve conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and your executive function starts shutting off. You're not listening. Like your body is basically going into fight, flight, or freeze um, states. And so it's like
Yep.
you just need to call it off. And at that point in time, it was so bad that we had like a word that we would
Mm-hmm.
say. But like when we
Mm-hmm.
got that triggered, and it was just like conversation's over. Whoever called it, if they said combo breaker, they
Yeah.
were then responsible for re-engaging the other person to say, hey, let's continue this conversation tomorrow morning.
Right.
But sometimes, yeah, it does get to that point. It also makes me think about like, what's the equivalent of that for us as individuals? When you got those voices in your head that just like won't shut up, how can you combo break them or be like, hey, I'm too triggered, I got to come back to you guys later? Like this is too much. I'll be right back.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think it's gonna ultimately comes down to the individual. But I think one thing that's really been helpful for me is it's such a simple concept, but I learned this from my first coach, Anna Maria, the concept of affect labeling, or just labeling our emotions, naming our emotions. And it's as simple as, saying, hey, I'm noticing that I'm feeling anxious because, fill in the blank. There's some narrative that's spinning around in my head. And I'm feeling this way because I'm believing that narrative. And for me, I think that I've found naming my emotions to be really, really useful, because it's inherently creating a little bit of distance between yourself and the felt sensation. Not that the felt sensation is not important, but it means that I'm no longer so tightly fused with it, right? So when I was saying earlier about how I can sometimes go, and I think many people go through this experience of feeling like my current experience is all I'm ever going to feel ever again. It's kind of, that's what's going on, right? We are so tightly wound up in that feeling. And really just like to our core identity in that moment, we can't imagine anything else. And so by recognizing that that is just a temporary sensation that will pass, and by shining a light on it through something like naming the emotion, we're able to like get a little bit of distance, right? And if we can get a little bit of distance, maybe we can get a lot more distance. Right. Again, not because we want it to go away so much as we're recognizing that just like a phenomenon happening in our consciousness, it's happening in our awareness, and we can tend to it, but not be sucked into it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it also reminds me of this term that I came across recently called gender normative alexithymia. I think I'm probably butchering that last word, but it basically means like how gender norms, the impact that gender norms has on our ability to articulate things with language. And in this case, it's specifically referring to, the article was about how guys have a really hard time labeling their feelings. And then it's like, there's actually a term for it because it's become such a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you generally don't have issues with naming your feelings, but has that always been the case?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's still a work in progress, to be totally honest with you. I think when I think about the feelings that I often can identify, and then also the ones that are a little bit less accessible or a little bit harder for me to conjure up or to experience or to name, I think I see what this phenomenon you're describing at work, So anxiety and worry are certainly very, very present for me. But weirdly enough, it's less common for me to experience anger, which is interesting because anger tends to be one of those feelings that is considered socially acceptable for men, right? And then maybe everything else is maybe more taboo or not as acceptable. And so, my relationship to anger is something that is still something that I think there's a lot of material to work through there. I think my relationship to lightness and playfulness is also something that I certainly have access to, but it doesn't come as naturally for me as I think for a lot of other people. And, is that due to my gender and the way I was raised and socialized? I have to imagine there's got to be something there for sure. My dad was a fairly stoic character growing up, and also wasn't a particularly present parent. I'm not making a judgment. I'm just simply stating it what it was. And so, I think I took cues from that, and I took cues from also the people around me in various contexts. But yeah, it's something, going back to your question, like what access do I have to these different emotional experiences, and how might I be in touch with those and to express those and to even identify them? It's kind of makes me think about a palette of colors, right? And so I might have language and the ability to identify a certain range, but it's certainly not like 16 million different colors, right? It might be 100 or something, just to proportionally for if we're talking about modern computing. Whereas back in the 1990s, maybe we were lucky to have 16 colors, right? And I've certainly met people who speak like they're in 16 color land, where we talk about what they're feeling, and they're like, I feel good, I feel bad, and that's kind of like the extent to which they can identify it. That's like their level of granularity. So I think part of it is just developing a vocabulary for these things. And if we don't have the range of vocabulary, then I think we have less access to some of these felt experiences. So that's kind of part of my ongoing education.
My wife had this idea the other day. I think she might have saw it somewhere on Instagram. Because don't we see everything on Instagram these days?
Yeah.
But like we did this chocolate tasting certification when we were at our heyday of making bean to bar chocolate at home. And we found it so hard in the beginning to articulate the specific flavors that we were tasting.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, this tastes like chocolate. Like
right.
Maybe this chocolate is a little bit more roasty than the previous chocolate, or it's smoother. And one of the things they did in this program was they gave us a taste wheel. And so it was like, okay, these are probably on the periphery, the things that you will be able to tap into most easily, like chocolate flavor. Okay, great. You got that one? Okay, within chocolate, is it like nutty? Is it sweet? And it started then opening up and helping you get more and more specific and to be able to say like, oh, this chocolate is deep chocolatey flavor with some berries, a hint of dried cherry and apricot, right?
Yeah,
like now we're talking like we're, a wine sommelier or something.
Yeah.
But it made me think a lot. It was in the context of how can we help people describe their emotions more? And like, what if we had one of those wheels in front of us that was like, I think I feel what I'm calling anxiety, but then within anxiety, there's like all these sub feelings that you could be having.
Yeah.
So
well, there's good news. Those things exist. They're called the Junto feelings wheel or emotion wheel.
That's must have been what it is.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you're describing, right? It's kind of like it starts with like the base emotions, and then they kind of fan out into more levels of specificity. And as I was listening to you, Adam, describe his experience with getting to the baseline, and then is it like more of this or less that? It's funny. It kind of reminded me of like when you go to the optometrist and you're getting fitted for glasses, and it's like, is that clear or is that clear, right? And it's kind of like you're going through this like progressive A/B test sort of series to get to the optimal, right? But it's sort of like how it works with emotions. You have to be able to. Well, I think one of the important things is you have to spend the time to allow yourself to feel them in the first place. And the more you're able to sit in presence with those feelings, the more you can start to differentiate. But it takes work. You can't just like read about it in a book. That's the thing. It's very, very much experiential. And one of the things that I notice in a lot of the folks that I work with, I happen to work with a lot of men. I notice it in myself as well, is that it's very easy to live up here and not down here, right? So like in my head, I can point to ideas of different emotional granularity, but if I'm not actually feeling those myself, then it's just this weird abstraction. And so I can never actually truly empathize with someone, or I can never really point to what I'm really feeling if all I'm doing is intellectualizing it on a regular basis. And that's really, as I'm describing that, I'm kind of calling myself out and reminding myself to continually do that work, because I know for me, it's really easy just to like point to the thing that I saw in the book or the article or the whatever it was, and somehow think I know what I'm talking about without actually having spent the time to experience it for myself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'd be curious, what do you think we've talked about manhood a little bit now, but like, what do you think this definition of what it means to be a man has an impact on our ability to tap more into these feelings and our emotions?
Yeah, well, I'm grabbing onto that question of like, what does it mean to be a man? As I listen to you, and it's I find it to be a hard question to consider. I almost frame it right off the bat as what you're not allowed to be in the beginning. Like, it's so funny. I was reminded of I'm reminding myself now of this thing that I experienced on Twitter a few months back. And I don't know, maybe you saw this. I tweeted something along the lines of, is anyone else just crying more than usual these days? And wow, what a day that was, because I don't even know how many people were in my mentions that day, but I was getting all these replies and quote tweets that were basically somewhere along the lines of, this guy's kind of a pansy, right? Wow. Like,
no kidding.
Oh my, I'm using
I
very
think that was the reason
here.
I reached out to you.
Yeah. So I'm using somewhat softened language here. I think it was a much harsher language. But yeah, I mean, it was, you saw this play out. You saw both men and women attacking and mocking me for daring to share this idea that maybe some sadness and tears were more present for me. And I thought that was, frankly, pretty fucking sad that people were so insecure in their idea of what being a man meant, that to see a man express this sort of vulnerability somehow made them feel the need to attack me for it. And yeah, it makes me kind of sad for them as people and for society, because I think that it's important to be able to access that. And I don't think that, I think the thing, look, to show some empathy for those people, I think the charitable explanation is that the concept that they're pointing to is that men are supposed to be strong and not weak, and men are supposed to be protectors and not the victims. And so to cry means that you're somehow inherently not strong and you're vulnerable prey in a certain sense. Like, you're not capable of taking care of yourself, and you need others to do that for you. And, honestly, I think that just points to a certain level of rigidity as to what vulnerability even means and what expressing sadness even means. So, as I think about what being a man or just the concept of masculinity means to me personally in the modern era, the main thing that comes up is this idea of, the first word that comes up is strength. And I think a lot of people have different definitions for what strength is, but to me, strength is merely the capacity to take care of our concerns, and the willingness to take care of our concerns, right? So, typically we think about strength in terms of like raw physical power, right? To move something, to strike something, to break something, whatever, or to build something. And all of those things are perfectly valid. But I think also strength means that you take care of concerns emotionally. It means that you are present to whatever's going on for you. It means that you're aware of what's going on for other people. And if they need help, then you're able to help them in certain ways. It means in the family unit, if there are concerns that need taken care of, then to me, strength means the capacity and the ability to move forward and to take care of those concerns. So, it's, if we can't make room for being sad and all that, then I think that's an unfortunate reality for many people. And my hope is that changes over time. I am optimistic. I think that on the macro level, that is shifting over time. And what I experienced with this flood of attacks and replies on Twitter was, there was a certain corner of the internet that was activated, but that's not necessarily representative of the broader population.
I secretly, and maybe I'm going to regret saying this, but like, I can't wait for the day for that corner of the internet to come for me.
Wow. Now I want to know what you have in your head as you say that.
I think it's a sign that like the message has gotten out enough that they feel compelled to come and try to tear it down.
Yeah.
Which is fine. They get to go and do that. And anyways, sidebar. What I really wanted to say for everything that you were just sharing about that is that I come back to that, the full spectrum of color, right? Or tools in the toolbox. Choose your analogy for what's available to men. And actually the thing that just popped into my head was like, when color TV came out, it's like, oh my gosh, holy cow, there's this whole new world. Or even there's a movie that I can't place the name of it, when like the colors start to come back, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's this whole world around me that now exists that I have access to. That's what I see. That's what I imagine, this like awakening, if you will, that's happening. And I think it's really a reawakening, because from some of the other guests that I've had, it sounds like there's some pretty good research that the pendulum really swung over the last hundreds, thousands of years, and that there used to be this culture of embracing the whole human, and
right.
Not just these parts of it that have to be the strong warrior, commander, fixer, problem solver type. That historically there's been much more archetypes for men to tap into that we all have inside of us. And it's just been unfortunate that it's kind of turned into strength has a very narrow definition, when your definition of strength is much wider and all encompassing, which frankly feels more liberating to me.
Yeah. Well, I think you're totally right. And I think this idea of embracing the whole human, and having this kind of integrated person, my sense is that we are, as a society, moving more and more in that direction. And this kind of like, I'll call it like a social immune response. Like when you have like these like corners of the internet that get like activated and triggered in their own way, there's this kind of rigidity that they hold where you mentioned archetype, right? So for them, there's this kind of or statement for them. It's like either you can be strong as a man, or you can kind of be in touch with your emotions and have this full spectrum, but you can't be both, right? And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. They think that a man who's in touch with their felt experience and emotions somehow can't exhibit strength, can't take care of their own concerns, can't stand up for themselves, which is, I think I understand where that confusion comes from, but I think that's where the fundamental error is being committed. And so I think that, moving forward into the modern era, it's kind of, you want both. You want you want wholly integrated humans who can express all of those things. And there's room for the masculine, there's room for the feminine, whatever the hell either of those mean anymore. Frankly, I think it's ever evolving concept. And wouldn't it be a shame to live on this planet without access to certain experiences that we ourselves are just cutting ourselves off from, but it's there if we want it? I mean, that seems kind of sad.
It really does. Yeah, and limiting and painful and stressful and all those things that I think most of us are trying to not have in our lives. You also made me think about, for me at least, the emotion that I tend to feel when something's like really uncomfortable or I'm uncertain about it is fear. Like that's the one that'll come up. And there's different flavors of fear, obviously, but it's almost like I imagine when people have the visceral reaction to men crying or men showing emotion or guys like us being vulnerable right now about our feelings, is like that triggered something inside of them that's uncomfortable. Somebody doesn't have a way to describe it. They don't know what to do with it. And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, if I don't know what this is bad. It needs to go away. Or it's like, what we were talking about earlier of the, one of the voices that sits on your shoulder, that maybe it's their dad or their uncle or a coach, who's yelling at them being like, don't show your feelings. Like that's for pussies.
That's right.
And other horrible words that are much worse than that. That then feels like, okay, well then the only way that I know how to react to that is with force and the strength that I've come to learn.
I think that's completely right. I think that what you're describing is a certain set of conditioning that's really, really common, where everyone has to develop a certain model of the world, a certain worldview, and that explains how things ought to be and how things function, and what is order, what is chaos, and what's in control and out of control. And so when you have generations of people who grow up with those sort of father figures and those ideas of what a man is supposed to be, and then that comes into conflict with men who maybe don't exactly fit that mold, I think it's completely natural for us to feel that fear response. We're like, this isn't right. Something is really, really wrong here. And, our programming is going to tell us to either flee it or destroy it, right? And those are some of our baser tendencies when we're experiencing fear. And, it comes as no surprise that so many people respond in that way. And I mean, geez, thank God that we have prefrontal cortexes, because if we didn't, then we'd probably be still stuck in tribes killing each other all the time, right? So I think it's why conversations like this are really important. It's why the way that we model for others and the opinions that we express in public are so important, because every single thing that we do is vote for what we consider to be acceptable or unacceptable. So I think it really is kind of incumbent on us to take that responsibility and to shape the world that we want to see.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, how do you take kind of all this work that you've done on yourself, the training that you've had on your coach, how does this show up with working with CEOs and executives? Like, are they wrestling with these types of things? Are they in some other type of universe and realm? Like, do you have similar conversations like these with your clients?
Yeah. So I think it's rare to have a coaching conversation and bring in the context of masculinity per se. I haven't done it yet. Maybe that will happen at some point. But I think where this ties in into the coaching work, what I would point to is, like, a lot of my job is to take whatever challenge or whatever goal is in front of the person, the client that I'm working with, and I'm not, making the distinction that my job isn't to help them solve their problem or to meet their goals, so much as help them really evolve into the person or the type of person who can meet that challenge or that goal, if that makes sense. And so that in practice comes down to understanding. So kind of what's my internal ecosystem doing? Like what are the patterns that I notice are taking place as I'm meeting this situation? What parts of those patterns are serving me? What parts of those patterns are not serving me? How can I start to get a better understanding of those things, so that I can then step forward into some more conscious choice? So sometimes we might get into a conversation around how a particular individual's worldview was formed, and maybe they did learn certain acceptable or unacceptable ideas or messages early on in childhood. That might come up. It's not necessarily the focus of the conversation, but to the extent that we can get a better understanding of what's really going on for that person, then there's this kind of magic that starts to unfold, because all of a sudden the mystery of why whatever situation is so hard starts to become a little bit less mysterious, and then that person can then make a different type of choice. And that doesn't mean that whatever they're going to do next is easy. In fact, what I find is through coaching, it actually requires my clients to work even harder than they might normally, right? Sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to go work with a coach, and they're going to solve all my problems and life is magically better. It's actually completely the opposite. It's like, now that you know what's going on for you, now that you know what your automatic patterns are, you don't have an excuse anymore. Like you have to go and make the choice that is you're supposed to be doing here. I don't mean supposed to be. It's still up to them. But so a phrase that sometimes comes up is that the things that we see are necessary are often simple but not easy. And I see that play out time and time again in the work that I do with my clients. So just it's like when you really start to figure out what's been holding you back, that's a scary place to be, because you can't make excuses anymore. You can't point and blame some other person or some other outside reason why you're not able to get your team aligned, or build your product fast enough, or whatever it is that particular client is going for that day. So it's an interesting sort of situation for me to be in, because I'm often finding myself in the place of having to challenge people. Really, just I'm not here to pat you on the head and make you feel better. Like I'll help you feel better to the extent that you can become more regulated and be in a place where you can really start to do this work in a productive way. But there's still the other side of it. It's like, but okay, this is all leading to some shift in your doing or your being, that will get you closer to where you want to go. And that's where, really the hard work comes in.
For sure. What do you love the most about being a coach?
I think the thing there are two things I really, really love about working as a coach. The first is that I get to learn so much every day. I probably learn more from my clients than they learn in their interactions with me, to be totally honest with you. So I find that I'm constantly gaining new insight about myself and other human beings on a regular basis, and that's awesome. I think the second thing I really love about coaching is you kind of just get to be witness to human beings that are making choices that they previously thought were not available to them. And that's inherently empowering. And you get to watch them really shift in the way that they're showing up. And I try to remind myself that it's not really me doing that. It's them doing that. I just get to be a part of it. So it's not always straightforward. It's not always wrapped up with a neat, nice bow. But when you see those shifts happen over time, you get to watch, human evolution happening right before your eyes. Geez, I can't think of anything better to do with my time, to be totally honest with you.
That sounds really special. And while I've never been a coach, I've had moments where people have said, "Hey, thanks for coaching," and I was kind of like, "Oh, I didn't realize that was a thing." I feel like you just gave me more than I gave to you, so I think I should be saying thanks in reverse,
Right.
which feels like the first point that you touched on. So let's see. With our final couple minutes here, I'd love to know: what bit of wisdom would you like to leave men, because that's who we're mostly talking to, but obviously any humans who might be watching this? What sort of wisdom can you leave them with?
That's a great question. So something that I notice in myself and something that I notice among a lot of men that I work with is that it's very, very easy to spend your days not giving yourself any time to be with yourself. And I think it's for a good reason, because I think oftentimes we are spending our time working a job, taking care of a family, tending to the needs of our partners. And I think there's a certain tendency among a lot of men to kind of like sacrifice themselves in the name of some greater purpose you can call it. And it's easy to lose sight of the importance of spending time with yourself. And really just to slow down and check in with yourself, even for a little bit. I noticed this sense of rushedness and tightness is very, very common for myself and for others. And so I think one of the simplest things that you can do for yourself is, as a form of daily practice, is to take 5, 10, 15 minutes to really be with yourself and no one else. And that could be in the form of a contemplative practice like meditation or journaling or something else entirely. But I think if we as men and as human beings are going to go and lead and create and really shape a better world, we have to make sure that we, as the vehicles that are going to do that, are properly taking care of ourselves. So you can't do that if you're constantly going on overdrive and not giving yourself a tune-up, to use an automobile analogy. So it doesn't take a lot, but just even a little bit, I think, is really helpful.
Love it. Very good. I will take that into consideration, certainly more than I normally do, coming out of this conversation, which I really enjoyed. I can't thank you enough for coming on this mandate with me, for opening up, for being vulnerable, for setting a good example. I know that there's going to be a lot of folks that get a lot out of what you shared. So thank you so much for being here with me.
It was an absolute pleasure, Adam. Really loved spending time with you, man.
All right. You are always welcome. I'll wrap up and then come hang out.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you were here live with us, I realized that I was completely neglecting the chat. It looks like Mario asked some really great questions, so I'll make sure that we get those addressed in the comments when I post this video. And then hopefully I think we covered some of them later on as the conversation went on. But shout out to Mario for getting the chat going this time around. Really appreciate it. And for everybody else, thank you for tuning in. It was such a wonderful conversation with Brian. We have lots more coming up. I just haven't put them on the website yet. So we are scheduled out with shows to April. So we've got a lot of really fantastic guests coming out, psychologists, entrepreneurs, normal dudes like me. We're going to be talking about all the things and keep these conversations going. So with that, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for being here with us. Take care of yourself, and we will see you again soon.